When we think of resistance movements, like the French resistance during World War II, we tend to think of the grand climactic moments, right? Sabotage, a dramatic escape, or a pivotal bridge exploded out of nowhere. But a key component of these resistance movements, often overlooked, is the concept of a safe house, a dwelling or a hiding place where members of the resistance could rest, get shelter from the enemy, replenish supplies, know the next step on the journey. Often, it's where the strategy went from an idea to an actual action, right? And there's a common truth in almost every resistance movement, basically in history, the idea that if you stay on the front lines too long without at some point going back to a place of safety, the enemy doesn't really have to keep fighting you. You're going to do their job for them by simply wearing yourself out. You become useless. Now, picture yourself. You're a courier riding a bicycle across Nazi-invaded France. It's cold, it's dark, it's the middle of the night. You're in dangerous territory. Every sound feels like a threat. And finally, you get to a safe house. Just before dawn, you step in to a farmhouse that looks to everybody else like just another house in the country. But to you, you know it's a beacon of hope. There you find warm food, dry clothes, encouragement from people that know your name. Your leaders, they remind you of the next step of the task. You catch a couple hours of sleep. And then, as night falls again, you head out the door, you get on your bicycle, and you enter back into the danger. But you've been reminded of what you're fighting for, why you're risking your life day after day after day. See, for the courier, getting to the safe house, that's not the main objective of his mission. But without the safe house, the mission can't continue. It's a pivotal component of his resistance, right? As we'll see today, this is one of the many roles that Sabbath plays for the follower of Jesus. As we carry out his mission, bring rest and healing, restoration and reconciliation to a world full of pain, of brokenness, of very real need. If you're visiting with us for the first time, as Stephen said, we've been in a new sermon series on Sabbath. And we've been exploring this ancient biblical practice through the 4 key movements of the Sabbath practice. Stop, rest, delight, and worship, or contemplate God. And we've been doing this by way of 3 of the main biblical themes of the many that Sabbath inhabits in Scripture. So last week, we looked at Sabbath as surrender and that first movement to simply stop. That by ceasing work for 24 hours, we surrender to the wisdom and the ways of God, or in the words of Matthew 11 that Stephen just read, we take his yoke upon us by embracing the life-giving work-rest rhythms that he wove into the very fabric of creation. It's a weekly proclamation that he is God and we are not, and that is very good. He's holding all things together, so we don't have to be. We can stop and rest. This week, we press into Sabbath as resistance through the next 2 movements, rest and delight. So we pick back up where we left off last week. God's people, the people of Israel, are wandering through the wilderness. They've been freed from slavery in Egypt, but we don't want to move too quickly and forget the reality that they were slaves for 400 years to Pharaoh. That's a really long time. Their entire existence at this point as a people group was wrapped up in their ability to produce bricks that Pharaoh used to build his storehouses to hold all of his excess wealth, grain, and other goods. Fail to make enough bricks fast enough, suffer the consequences of Pharaoh's slave drivers. Keep up with the expected quota and stay in Pharaoh's good graces, at least until he ups the quota, or reduces the time frame in which you have to build them, or takes some of your supplies away, and on and on and on. Obviously, that kind of experience has a massive impact on you as an individual and as a people group. Now, imagine you're in slavery. It's all you've ever known, and seemingly overnight, you and 2 million of your closest family and friends are all of a sudden free, wandering the wilderness, heading towards what God has promised to be a land full of milk and honey, abundance. Talk about whiplash, right? From oppression to complete freedom, literally overnight. But that kind of trauma that you've experienced over your entire lifetime, that doesn't heal very quickly, right? You don't rewrite that kind of a story overnight. There were technically free people, but they hadn't yet learned how to live into the freedom that God had given them. He'd brought them out of Egypt, but as we've often said, there was still a lot of Egypt left inside of them. So one of the first things that God did was give him the Sabbath command, right? We looked at that last week in Exodus chapter 16. He did this to help them remember their identity as his people, not as Pharaoh's slaves. Exodus 16:23. This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Rest and relaxation weren't privileges that slaves got to enjoy. Those were for the wealthy, for the privileged, for the free person. By telling them not to work on that seventh day, he was inviting them to remember that they are not valued by what they produce. They are valued by his name, by his image, that because they are a human being, they are of ultimate worth. Constant striving, endless toil, he says, bring exhaustion. But in me, you can have rest that comes with freedom. A weekly proclamation. I belong to God, not to Pharaoh. So we see that in Sabbath, we declare our allegiance to God again and again, week over week over week. I belong to God, not to Pharaoh. And we have the exact same struggle today, don't we? As followers of Jesus, we've been set free from the power of sin and death. Yet if we're honest, there's still quite a bit of Egypt left in us. There's a lot more pharaohs around us than we tend to realize. And they're all just as eager to enslave us as Pharaoh was back in Egypt. The pharaohs of success and achievement, telling us our value lies in the amount of overtime we're willing to give to the office, or the amount of sacrifice we're willing to make in any other sphere of life except our career. The pharaohs of comfort and consumption. Just get a little bit more square footage so the family can be comfortable. If I get the newest iPhone, then I'll really be productive. The new version of the car is really going to help my life situation. The latest and greatest of you fill in the blank, whatever it is. But like our Jewish predecessors before us, we too have been given an incredible tool to resist these pharaohs, right? A nice car is not a bad thing. A comfortable house is not a bad thing. Working really hard for your employer is a very good thing. But when they dominate our lives, the best of things can enslave us. So God invites us to Sabbath, to stop, to cease our productivity and our striving, to rest in his provision and his presence, to delight in the goodness that he offers us constantly, and to worship him through every single one of these moments. The Pharaoh of achievement, he's over there telling you, you are what you accomplish. But when we practice Sabbath, we're reminded, I am God's beloved child before I achieve anything. The Pharaoh of productivity says your value equals your output. How many bricks can you produce? In Sabbath, we remember my value comes from God, not my work. In consumerism, we're reminded you are the sum of what you own. That's how you stay relevant. That's how you fit in this culture. When we practice Sabbath, we remember God has already given us more than enough. Busyness tells us if you're not busy, you're either lazy or irrelevant. But I can remember when I practiced Sabbath, that he's still working, so I don't have to for 24 hours, and it's amazing, right? Security would tell us it's up to you to make sure you're safe. You have everything that you need. Things are exactly as they need to be. Through Sabbath, we remember that the Lord oversees all things. And maybe the worst, the hardest for me, probably for our culture, the Pharaoh of hurry, that faster is always better. But through Sabbath, we remember that love grows, not as we do more things or move to the next task. Love grows at the speed we are able to be present. So Jesus said in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, anybody experiencing the oppression of a Pharaoh in your life. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, not oppressive, not demanding, not just looking to get something out of you. You'll find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Just like the Israelites, God has invited us to proclaim on a weekly basis that we belong to him, right? But freeing Israel from slavery, that wasn't the only point of the Exodus. Absolutely a massive part of it, steeped in God's love and care for his people. But there's still a mission to be carried out, right? There's still a whole lot of restoration to unfold across the world. And he intends to use his people to do that work. The process of getting Egypt out of Israel would involve a huge plan, summed up in 10 short tasks, if you will. Some would call them commands or laws, right? This is a rehabilitation program or a formation plan, if you will, because he had to teach them how to live as his people. They lived their entire lives as slaves, right? So he's saying, hey, I'm going to help you on this journey. I'm going to help you step into the ways of my kingdom so that you can go to the promised land and live out the mission I have set before you to do my work as my people, a good and beautiful work. But in order to do that, you're going to have to learn how to live into the freedom that I have already given you. This isn't about control. This is a gift of love. This is him saying, you need rest. You may not think you need rest, but you need rest. It's not about domination, from one Pharaoh to another. It's about saying, as I would say to my kids, every single day of the week, it's time for a nap. You may not think you need it. You may not even want it right now, but you can trust me. As your loving Father, it's time for rest. So through Sabbath, as we embrace the ways he set before us, we form the freedom he has called us into, the freedom he's already given us, the freedom we just don't fully know how to handle yet. So he gives them the 10 Commandments, a very practical set of guidelines designed to teach them a new, a better, a more life-giving way. Guidelines that would both serve them personally and equip them for what's to come in the promised land. You may not have noticed back in Exodus 16:23, but it turns out this Sabbath rest is really important to God, so much so that he actually said, I command you to do this. And that is such a gift to us because he knows best. He has a bigger perspective than we do. So as my kids trust me, sometimes, to take a nap, we can trust God. We do sometimes, right? To take a rest. He gave these Ten Commandments twice. And again, that Sabbath rest was so important, he actually included it again, reiterated it here in the Ten Commandments. We tend to forget that honoring the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath, is one of the Ten Commandments. Now, today is not a sermon about whether Sabbath is or isn't still commanded to us today. I think, honestly, that is beside the point. It's a good and beautiful gift, so why wouldn't we? But it is a command for his people in Israel nonetheless. Given twice, once at the beginning of their journey, once towards the end of their journey in the wilderness. The commands themselves are basically identical. The meaning is all the same. There's just slight word changes throughout. The biggest difference in language comes in the commandment to keep the Sabbath. So the language of the commandment given the first time in Exodus 20 at Mount Sinai, that's oriented towards the creation account, when God first established Sabbath. The emphasis here is on restoration, restoring things to the way he originally intended them to be. They've been in slavery their whole lives. They're getting a fresh start. The Ten Commandments are supposed to help them on that journey, help them learn how to live into their freedom. And the Sabbath command is specifically designed to remind them that God's original design for human flourishing involved rest. Now, fast forward 40 years, and God gave his people the same commandments again in Deuteronomy chapter 5. That's what we're going to be looking at today as they're preparing to enter into the promised land. So in Deuteronomy 5, starting in verse 12, it says, "Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." There's a lot in there, but the summation of it all is everybody and everything deserves rest, because that's how God designed it. But here in the Deuteronomy version of this command, the language looks back not to Genesis, not towards the creation account where God first established Sabbath. It looks back to Egypt, towards his liberation of his people out of slavery. The emphasis is on redemption and reconciliation, which is the mission he's called us to live out for the world, to embrace freedom and extend it to others. But look at verse 15. "You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt." Here's the interesting part. At this point, right before they enter the promised land, any Israelite 20 years of age or older at the time they originally left slavery in Egypt had died in the wilderness. The majority of this generation had never known slavery firsthand. And yet he says, remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Remember here, the language implies bringing it into your reality as if you had been there yourself. Let the history of your parents' generation become your history as you enter the promised land, as my ministers of reconciliation. Though you've never experienced it firsthand, you're about to enter a place full of abundance, full of comfort, things you've never experienced before. And those can very quickly turn into pharaohs that will enslave you. This is why, in this version of the command, God starts with the word observe. Observe the Sabbath. Observe. The deeper, more literal translation of that would be to guard, to protect, to make sure you don't forget it or neglect it. This one's really important, God says, because for the first time in your life, it's not just going to be you and your people. Sure, you've encountered small pockets as you've wandered the desert. But for the first time in your life, you're going to be faced with a choice: allegiance to me or in slavery to a host of pharaohs. Which are you going to choose? Moses would warn them just a few chapters later in Deuteronomy that nothing will breed amnesia in them quicker than the comfort, then the abundance, then the flourishing that they're about to step into. Nothing will make them forget their God quicker than those things. So he says in chapter 8, "Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his rules, his statutes, which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and when your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." Church, that passage should cause every single one of us pause. Are we not comfortable? Have we not been given incredible blessing today? And that is a good and beautiful thing. Again, I'm not speaking against those things, but the creator of the universe seemed to think it pretty important to warn us not to get too caught up in them, lest we forget about him. In Deuteronomy, God says, "Through the Sabbath command, I have redeemed you." Don't run back to Pharaoh. Don't willingly enslave yourself to anything else, because it's only going to destroy you. If the Exodus version of the Sabbath commandment in the Ten Commandments is God's design for human flourishing, the Deuteronomy version, as we see here, this is about remembering his rescue, right? Creation gives us design. Redemption in Deuteronomy gives us purpose. But both of these things are available to us today. Through them, God wants to form us into disciples that can both declare our allegiance to Jesus. I serve you and you alone in our words and in the way we actually live our lives. He wants to teach us how to walk in the ways of his kingdom, both for our benefit, because it'll cause our flourishing, and so that we can resist any other Pharaoh we encounter 1,000,000 times a day. Because we've been called to be a beacon of hope, of light to the world. But if we're just as exhausted, as worn out, as oppressed by the lives we're living, as those we're trying to speak hope to, we got a really uphill journey ahead of us. Sabbath, God says. Sabbath is how you actually live out that mission. And rest and delight, as we will press into here now, are key elements of that movement of resistance. But to fully grasp this, we have to look at the other 9 of the 10 commandments given to us by God. So when we look at the list, 1 through 10, 2 categories or orientations or really relationships start to bubble up to the surface. Commandments 1 through 3 are all about a relationship to God. And then commandments 5 through 10 are about our relationship to other people. Or put another way, 1 through 3, loving God, have no other God but me. Don't make false idols. Don't take my name in vain. 6 through 10, 5 through 10. Math is hard. Loving your neighbor. Love God. Love your neighbor. That should sound familiar to us, right? Jesus himself said in Matthew 22, responding to the Pharisees when they're trying to trap him in his words, which of the commandments is the greatest? Jesus replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest command, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Love God, love neighbor. 1 through 3, 5 through 10. It's like he wrote it. He did. Before we can really love our neighbor well, we have to first know God, receive his love, and love him in return. And when we rest on Sabbath, we declare our allegiance to him again and again. You are the one true God. Nobody else deserves my worship. We say, you're God, not me. You're God, not Pharaoh. You're God, not my house or my health or my career or my family or my productivity or anything else. So on Sabbath, we stop making bricks and we rest. And in doing so, it begins to reorder our loves. And God starts to be where he's supposed to be, at the number one spot. We allow ourselves the joy and the satisfaction of a slower pace, letting go of the constant hurry and the hustle of the week, all the impatience, the distraction, the irritation, if your week is anything like mine, that start to come to the surface. And we rest, and we press into the love of God, because we can't give what we haven't first received. Mark Buchanan, the author of the book that we're doing for our next book club, he puts it this way. Busyness makes us stop caring about the things we care about. We say we care about them, but the way we live our lives shows we haven't actually prioritized them the way we should. If busyness makes us stop caring about the things we say we care about, how much more will it make us stop caring about the things that we already struggle to care about? The people that we find hard to be patient with or love. The very people that Jesus would have moved towards, not away from. Rest creates space where we can actually be present with God and receive what he is offering, while at the same time being present to those around us, extending the love we've received from him back to them. Rest it's restorative. It restores life where there is an absence, where there is weariness. So what does rest look like? Well, if you're able, sleep in. That's a really great way to start. It's not available to all of us. I get that. I live that life. Sleep in. Take a nap, go for a walk, sit on the front porch and sip a good cup of coffee. Read a good book, have an unhurried conversation with somebody you love. Play with your kids purely for the sake of being with them, of enjoying them. Or one of my favorites, sit in silence for just a couple minutes. Take a few deep, slow, regulating breaths. There's no official list of what rest looks like. But a good question to ask is, what restores you? What do you feel like afterwards has actually put something back in you that was missing? Whatever that thing is for you, I say do it unashamedly. But what's restful for you may not be what's restful for me. And that's okay. That's actually good. That's by design. But rest does not look like just checking out from the world. Vegging out on the couch, binging movies, scrolling our phones for hours until our brains are mush. There's way too much data out there that proves those types of leisure are not actually life-giving. They deplete us of our energy. Rest is not an escape. If it doesn't restore you in mind and heart and body and soul, do something else on Sabbath. There's 6 other days of the week for you to do those things. A helpful framework that I've used over the years, coined by a late Jewish scholar, kind of a leading thought giver on Sabbath. Abraham Joshua Heschel, he says, if you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind. If you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands. And here's what that looks like lived out. I work in the world of thought and relationship as a pastor. So on Sabbath, I try to include something that allows me to rest through my body. I go on walks with my family. I play at playgrounds with my kids. I'll even do fun projects around the house. Some might say that's not allowed. I say, get behind me, Satan. For me, using my hands in a way that's not trying to move the ball forward, in a way that's not trying to put out a fire or stop a crisis, but touches in my creativity. That restores me in a way that reading a book doesn't always do. Now, to contrast that, because my job is highly relational, my capacity for relational output is often pretty maxed by the time Sabbath comes around. So large social gatherings, being together with 20 of you, sounds like a nightmare. I don't want to do that. Or multiple hangouts over the course of my Sabbath, or even over the course of my weekend. I have to think of the other days as well. But we have to be careful here because Sabbath is both personal and communal. So we can't hide behind a personality trait. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, God says Sabbath is good for you, and it's supposed to include his people. I'm an introvert. My tendency would be to hide from a humanity, like just not see a living soul, even my family at times. But that is not healthy. It's not life-giving in the entirety of Sabbath. Moments of that are good. But Sabbath should have some form of communal aspect, introvert or not. For the extroverts in the room, the temptation is to pack the day full of exciting, fun activities with all of your friends because that's how you recharge. And some of that is good. But even the most extreme introvert needs the slower pace, the stillness of silence to be with God. Rest, in turn, leads us to delight, where we move from simply receiving the love of God to then offering it back to him in worship, in gratitude, in enjoyment. Not merely a day off from work filled with the typical leisure and entertainment of the weekend. That's what Eugene Peterson, the author of the Message paraphrasing of the Bible, that's what he called the bastard Sabbath. It's a cheap substitute for a day intentionally steered towards the kind of joy, delight that directs our hearts upward in responses of worship again and again and again throughout the day. There's a Christian author and professor and therapist, Dan Allender, that speaks on the subject in his book, Sabbath. I think he puts it better than many. He says, the Sabbath is an invitation to enter delight. The Sabbath, when experienced as God intended, is the best day of our lives. Without question or thought, it's the best day of the week. It's the day we anticipate on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and the day we remember on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. He's Jewish by ethnicity, so he practices on Saturday. Sabbath is the holy time where we feast, we play, we dance, we have sex. Married people. Sing, pray, laugh, tell stories, read, paint, walk, watch creation in its fullness. Few people are willing to enter the Sabbath and sanctify it, to make it holy, because a full day of delight, a full day of joy is more than most people can bear in a lifetime, let alone a week. He's painting a picture for the abundance of life that God wants to offer us as we come to him and rest. Again, there's no decisive list here for what delight looks like. We all have to do the personal work to figure out what causes you to delight in God. It also requires, this is really important, a willingness to slow our pace way down and be fully present in each moment that comes. So this Sabbath, I found delight in dinner with friends that Catherine and I love. No agenda, no timeline. It was casual. We shared stories, life updates. We laughed a lot. It was wonderful. And then the next morning, I found delight in sipping a really good cup of coffee, sitting on my front porch before the rest of my family had woken up. And I took delight in watching my kids come down the stairs that morning, seeing their love for Sabbath already at a young age. As they realized it's Sabbath, what does this special day hold for us? We delighted at lunchtime over a seemingly normal moment of humor that, because of the slow pace and intentionality of Sabbath, resulted in all four of us in uncontrollable laughter. Oakley and myself struggling not to spew food and milk all over the table as we kept our laughter in. I delighted in watching my wife take not one, but 2 naps. That's a feat all in itself. I took delight in watching my kids slide down a refrigerator box propped up on the stairs until Oakley got hurt, and then it wasn't delightful. But I hope you're seeing something in all of these things. There's nothing extravagant here. These didn't require any kind of crazy planning. They're not overly spiritual. They're not scripted, not forced. But each of them, along with countless others throughout our Sabbath, moved me, and as I saw in my family, them as well, in gratitude towards God as they unfolded. Moments I would have missed. I would have completely missed them, most likely, throughout any other day of the week because I wasn't slow enough. I wasn't present enough to catch them. Sabbath is the commandment most likely, as we look back at the 10 Commandments, most likely to expose whether we really believe the first 3, whether our true allegiance lies with Jesus, or if we're living in a way that shows we're still enslaved to some other Pharaoh. And it's the commandment that's most directly determinant of our ability to live out the last 6. Does our life extend the freedom of Christ to our neighbors, to our coworkers, to our children? Or have we become a Pharaoh in the way that we value or view them? Without regularly drinking of the Father's love through the wellspring of Sabbath, of rest and delight, week over week, any attempt that we make to love our neighbor well, I'm of the opinion, can only be half-hearted. Again, you can't give what you haven't first received. And Sabbath moves us towards humanity in a way that doesn't just seek the bare minimum fulfillment of the law. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal. If that's our interpretation, then I think we're settling for a lot less than God has for us. Sabbath moves us towards others in a way that offers the same care God gives us and allows us to step into their world and journey through it together. Most of all, I think Sabbath gives us new eyes to see the world through. The power of Sabbath, rest, and delight meets its climax in our ability to look out into the world around us, in our neighborhood, in our family, in our offices, at the park, wherever you find yourself. A world full of brokenness, of pain, of truly evil things. and see our fellow image bearers, whom God loves immensely and wants to welcome home. As followers of Jesus, we've been given an incredible invitation. Help bring restoration to the world. That's a daunting task if we think about it in our own strength. But we haven't been asked to do it in our own strength. Come to me, take my yoke upon you. Learn my ways. That way starts with rest. We're going to encounter a host of pharaohs today, tomorrow, throughout the week. Success, busyness, performance, consumption, productivity, comfort, and on and on and on. Each one of them just as greedy as the next. Always demanding that we make more bricks faster. It's exhausting. So thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. We've been given that safe house, a refuge, a shelter, the gift of Sabbath rest and delight, where we can be reminded who we are, whose we are, and what we're really living for. Those are three really big things that shape life. Yes, Sabbath is absolutely, it's an act of resistance against the struggles, the temptations, the pharaohs of life. But it's also an incredible invitation to a life of rest and delight, regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in. And if that's not a picture of flourishing, well, then I don't know what is. So Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Pray with me into that now. Father, thank you for your constant love and care. Your constant desire to see your people thrive, to see your family regularly step more and more and more into the image of your Son, Jesus. And thank you for the incredible invitation you've given us to help be a part of that work in other people's lives in a way that changes the trajectory of eternity for them. Thank you that you've given us a safe haven, the gift of Sabbath rest, to be able to run to week in and week out, 52 times a year, where we can stop our striving, where we can rest in your amazing presence, your constant provision for us. Thank you for the way that you want to draw our hearts towards delight in you in a way that nothing else can, that nothing else in this life will truly satisfy. God, I ask that you would just keep drawing us through those moments back to a heart posture of worship. Worship of you and you alone. Lead us, God, as we prepare to step into the week ahead. Give us a curiosity, a desire to learn more about the rest that you've offered us. Help me to see the lack of delight in the small moments of my week. And don't allow us to become complacent, to become content in anything less than the fullness of what you have for us. Let it be for your glory. Let it be for the good of your church. Let it bring heaven down to earth. Amen.